Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Space for Life. I've been really looking forward to today's episode, as I think you'll learn as I get into today's episode with my special guest, Terry Whalin. And I think you'll quickly learn why I'm really interested in this, because Terry is what I consider the guru of all things written. And over the last years of my life, last 5-6 years, I've been delving into this new world of the written word, both by blogs and with my first book. And now reflecting back, I wish I had the connection with Terry so many years ago that he could have prevented so many mistakes and led me along so much better path. So I'm still so interested in learning so much, and have already in this short time, Terry and I have gotten to know one another. So I'm so excited about this episode to share, for Terry to share his journey and some of the learnings that maybe a few who are listening to this podcast have, an interest in that written word. But even outside of that, it's his journey about how do we live out mission in our life that I think will be enjoyable for all of us to learn from. A special aspect of it is in Terry's work as both a literary agent, acquisitions editor, and an author. He's had this incredibly unique opportunity to talk to some of the giants of faith. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that. So, quick introduction, then I'm going to let Terry jump in. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you. Thank you, Tommy.
Terry really has been all things written. He's been a magazine editor, written over 60 works within, 50 different magazine publications over the years. Longtime literary agent, and now acquisitions editor for Morgan James Publishing. And I'll let him kind of distinguish between those two tasks, works that he's done. In addition to that, he's authored more than 60 books, which absolutely boggles my mind, having written one, to think how could someone possibly in less than 300 years write 60 books. So that's just amazing. And one of his books, I'm on the last chapter of 10 publishing myths. And I have to say, in my process of learning how to write and to try to have a book published, I've done deep dives into this. This book has been the most practical, helpful book that I have read along this. And that's not blowing smoke. That is just a real fact. So I have already just learned so much from that. So many other books. One of his recent, Jumpstart Your Publishing Dreams. So much to talk about, but now I'll be quiet. Terry, welcome to Space for Life. And I'd love for you to just share a bit of your journey along the way.
Yeah, Tommy, thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate this so much. And you're right, it is a journey for each of us, highs and lows and all kinds of things that we've been through in this process. But I actually had an English teacher in high school that saw something in my writing and thought that maybe I should do some writing for the high school newspaper. And so I did that. I became the editor of my high school newspaper, and I thought I was really a good writer, and so I went off to Indiana University, one of the top 10 journalism schools in the country, and joined their writing staff. I thought I was really going to make a difference there. And my first story that I did for those guys for the newspaper, I think they had me rewrite it about 4 times. And when it appeared in the paper, it was like 2 paragraphs, didn't even have my name on it or anything, So I quickly learned that I had a lot to learn in the writing area to make some progress there. And there were about 100 of us on the writing staff. We produced a full-size newspaper about 6 days a week. So it was a big job, for college kids to be doing that. And this was in the pre-computer days. I joined a social fraternity on the Indiana campus, was living far away from the way that I was raised and all that kind of thing. And I was sitting one afternoon with about 30 other people on old Royal typewriters before in the pre-computer days. And the way we did it back then is if you made a mistake, you just backed up and X'd out and went on. And I knew that my copy was going to look terrible. I'd been out drinking the night before and couldn't get my fingers on the right keys. And I kept muttering to myself, Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ. And this little blonde haired girl that was sitting next to me, she turned to me and she said, "Oh, Terry, don't say that, because one of these days when you really need Jesus, you'll call out for him and he won't be there." And I thought, what is this? I'm a Christian. I go to church when I'm at home. I read the Bible in church when I'm at home. I had no relationship at all, Tommy, but she encouraged me to go down to a little bookstore a couple blocks off the Indiana campus. They had pretty cards and posters, and maybe I'd find a book that interested me. So I wandered down there a couple days later, and I bought this book called Jesus the Revolutionary. I thought, how in the world could Jesus be a revolutionary? I had no idea. So I took that book back to my room. I read that book, and it showed me a different side of Jesus than I'd ever seen before. And about that time, somebody invited me to a little Jesus people gathering in downtown Bloomington, Indiana, and they were sitting on scraps of carpets and they had little candles lit. And as I went to that meeting, I realized those people had something that I didn't have. And so I got a Bible, and I just really changed the whole direction of my life. So instead of joining the Chicago Tribune or the Indianapolis Star or one of those places as a journalist when I graduated from college, I joined a group called Wycliffe Bible Translators. And my journalism colleagues thought I was a little nuts, because instead of trooping off doing that, I went to Guatemala, Central America. I worked among the Southwest Cachiquel people down there and spent 10 years of my life in linguistics, which is way different than what I thought I was going to do. But I wandered back to my writing, started going to writers' conferences and writing for magazines and that kind of thing. And that's where I've been ever since. In 1992, I published my first book. It was a little children's book that I did. I went to a writers' conference, and one of the editors that was there at the conference told me she had a problem. And I always listen whenever these editors tell me they have a problem, because it's like, hey, can I do something about this? And her problem was she worked at David C. Cook, and as a part of their mission statement was that they were supposed to publish books to interest kids in the world and how there's a big world out there that you can go to as kids. And she asked me if I had any ideas. But at that time, my kids were little, and I was reading a lot of children's books to them. And I knew that Stephen Lawhead is how he publishes his fantasy stuff, but he'd done a series of children's books called Howard Had. Howard had a spaceship, Howard had a hot air balloon, all that kind of stuff. And he combined real pictures with a little cartoon character in those books. And so I pitched my idea to this editor. I said, hey, what if we used real pictures from Wycliffe and combined them with a cartoon character to show kids that they could go anywhere in their life. They could do any kind of occupation. And she looked at me and she said, that's a good idea, Terry. Write that up and send that to me. So
did that come just off the top of your head?
Huh?
Did that idea just come at the moment, kind of off the top of your head? Did you go into that meeting kind of prepared with, okay, here's one of the ideas that I might pitch, or did she?
No, I had no idea. It just came off the top of my head. So I pitched this idea, and she thought it was a good idea. So I went home and I did what a lot of writers don't do. I made a little note and I followed up and I sent her what she asked for. A lot of times I ask writers all the time to send me stuff, and I know that only about maybe 10% will actually follow through and send you what you ask for at the end of the day. Even though I ask for it, they just, I don't know if they get frustrated or busy or embarrassed or what, but they just don't send it to me. So I was the exception that I wrote this up and sent this to this editor. And now it wasn't published like I sent it in. I had to work back and forth a number of times to be able to write a children's book. But that book became my first book that was published in 1992. Is a little
Wow.
children's book called When I Grow Up, I Can Go Anywhere for Jesus. And it combined a cartoon character with real pictures from Wycliffe, uh, 5 different occupations to show kids that they could do a lot of different things with their life. And that's kind of where I got started in the whole book business, doing that.
Oh man, that's fascinating. There's so many things that I think are really interesting about that story. I think back just to the beginning of that conversation with the blonde girl, when you're there, and I think of kind of the boldness it took for her to make that comment that could have been perceived as offensive or certainly a little bit aggressive. And yet God used that, to make such a huge difference in our life. And it's, those ordinary moments and sometimes those relatively ordinary comments that we might make, we never know, the impact. The entire trajectory of your life kind of was hinged on that moment. Not that God couldn't have reached you some other way, but I think that's interesting. And I take that as an encouragement myself to just say, you never know, what interaction you might have with someone and the impact it might have.
Oh, it's really true, Tommy. I mean, I go to these writers' conferences, I sit with people, we eat and we, drink coffee, and years after the fact, somebody will come back to me and talk about some little conversation that I had with them that I don't even recall, but it was very impactful to them. So we never know the impact of our words and what's going to happen. And it turns out I'm still friends with that little blonde haired girl. We've been friends for like 50 years now. It's been a long time since I was in college, but she's still one of my friends that I get in touch with every now and then.
That's amazing. So I think what's interesting is God took kind of an innate talent and a gift and a passion for you that existed all the way back to high school in terms of writing, and then reformed it into something, certainly for his glory, but for your good also along the way. So that's amazing. So all the way back to 1992 with your first children's book, and now 60 books plus later, and a career both within the writing industry and as a writer. That's amazing.
Yeah, I've had incredible opportunities. I back then in my magazine business, I started interviewing authors, and I've interviewed more than 150 best-selling authors over the years. And I may write a 1,000, 1,200 word piece about them, but you can imagine sitting with these people and learning about how they practice their craft and what they do and why they do it when they do it has taught me a tremendous amount as a writer myself, uh, doing that kind of thing. It's been a real education on my part.
But one of the things I noticed, and just as we've got to know one another a little bit, and I've had just a very limited experience with people in the publishing industry, and very often my limited experience is a little bit of a hesitation, a wall up, because authors are always wanting things from them. And one of the things that I've already appreciated in our interactions is that you've kind of willingly and in an unsolicited way offered help and things to me, passed along some, a podcast or a conversation. So there is a servant kind of perspective, a desire kind of fundamentally to help rather than looking at yourself as the person that, is over and above all of these people who need you. I really appreciate your spirit, I guess is what I'm saying. It is very apparent to me, just even in our little bit of interactions.
Well, thanks, Tommy. I mean, I realize that as a writer, I've learned a lot, but I still have a lot to learn. And if anything, the work that I do, stands really on the shoulders of all the people that have taught me over the years. I mean, amazing experiences. I mean, even while I was with Wycliffe way back when, I was the editor of our publication. And on a Sunday afternoon, I would go over to the office and nobody was there. And I would do some writing myself back then. And one day I went over there and the light in the director's office was on. I thought, why in the world would that happen? And so I wandered by there, and lo and behold, the guy that was sitting there was a well-known writer. Jamie Buckingham was his name, and Jamie wrote "Run Baby Run" for Nicky Cruz.
Yeah.
He wrote "Tramp for the Lord" for Corey ten Boom. Just all kinds of books like that.
Oh,
that
love
Jamie
that
wrote.
book.
And Jamie, twice a year, he lived in Florida. He would fly out to California and he would write all the stuff that our director needed. And so he'd write the column for the magazine. He'd write the little thing that went out to the members. He'd write our donor letter for Wycliffe. And, I had supporters at Wycliffe that would say, I support 10 missions, Terry, but I never read the little letter that's in there, but I always read the Wycliffe letter, and what people didn't know is that letter was written by this really great writer, Jamie Buckingham. And he didn't get any credit for that. He didn't really care whether his name was on anything else or not, but what an amazing servant writer he was to help Bernie twice a year to fly out and do that kind of thing. Bernie May was our director back then.
That's a great story, and gosh, what a different place it would be if we, regardless of our place and the work we did, could kind of enter into with that attitude of just trying to help and serve without concern with what we get from it. It would be, gosh, everything would be so different. It's an opportunity, I think, for all of us. And so I love that. So have there been kind of any particular major moments? You talk about 92 writing your first book, and now we're 32 years later. And I know before the podcast, you described kind of a moment in 2007 that was a big moment for you. So what have been some of the big moments along the way that have led you to what you're doing?
Well, yeah, I've written all kinds of stuff. I've written children's books. I've written co-authored books. I've written devotionals. I've contributed to study Bibles. I've done all kinds of things through the years, and had great opportunities, and I'm always grateful for that. But in 2007, I was a litter agent. I was running a little litter agency in North Scottsdale, Arizona, and Mark Victor Hansen, the co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, invited me to come to Mega Book Marketing University out in Los Angeles. There are about 400 people that gathered at this thing. And as an agent, they had me come and I took pitches from writers during the conference. But I also attended with everybody else and sat there as they spoke. And at that point in my life, Tommy, I'd written about 50 books for traditional publishers. So I'd written for Tyndale and Zondervan and Bethany House and all these different publishers out there. But my books were not selling. And what happens is the publisher gives you an advance, and then your book has to make back that advance before you make any more money. And they send you these statements a couple times a year. So I was getting negative royalty statements from the publishers because my books didn't earn. And about halfway through that conference, it was almost like I woke up and I realized how little I was doing myself to promote my own books. Sure, the publishers were publishing them, they were getting them into the bookstores, but I was doing almost nothing myself to be telling people about it. Sure, I had a little Whalin.com website, but I had nothing else that I was doing. And one of the speakers at that event was Jack Canfield. Jack, the other co-author on the Chicken Soup for the Soul books, has written this book called The Success Principles, where he's really studied success. And one of the things that I've read that book, and the very first success principle says that I will take 100% responsibility for my own success. Now, none of us want to take 100% responsibility for our own success. We want somebody else to do it. I wanted a publisher to do it, a publicist, somebody else other than me. But during that conference, I decided to change. I decided to take 100% responsibility for my own success. And so back then, I launched a little blog in 2008. I've got, I write it once a week. I've got 1,700 entries in my blog at this point. There's a lot of information in there. Yeah. And I have a thing that searches for my name out there online. And about a year ago, I found an article that said that there were over 600 million blogs out there, but this named the top 27 content producers. And to my surprise, I was one of the top 27 content producers because of all this volume of stuff that I have out there, I guess. So I was there along with Seth Godin and Ryan Holiday and Jeff Goins and people like that. I just couldn't believe it. Yeah. And but it's all back to this principle where I decided that I was going to actively do something every day to be telling people about my work and my book and stressing the benefits of that. I don't just send out messages and say buy my book. I really try to help people understand the benefits that they'll get from my work, whatever that is. And that's really made a change in my life. It's my book started selling. There's all different kinds of things that have happened just from that one turning point right there.
It's so great, and I think it brings up something that I hear in conversations when I'm doing life coaching or executive coaching with someone. There's this I think almost Christianized misunderstanding that says that the results are all up to God, and therefore we just sit back and respond to opportunities that God creates for us. And if he wants us to be successful, then he'll make it happen. If he doesn't, then it won't. And there's this kernel of truth in that. And yet, I think what you're expressing of this attitude of saying, I'm going to take 100% responsibility, I think that's stewarding the deeper truth that God is partnering with us in the journey of our lives. And in that partnering, we are called to be active and to bring the highest level of excellence in who we are and in performing our craft that we can possibly do with the humility that God can do what he wants through it. But I find that too often people go and swing the pendulum all the way to the side of saying, no, I'll create this book, or I'll do this thing for God, and now I just sit back and he does it or he doesn't do it. And what you're expressing, I think, is a different attitude. And granted, it can be taken to an extreme, but I think the beauty and the right sizing of it is we take that responsibility with the humility that we're in partnership with God in the walk and the journey of our lives. Is that expressing?
No, that makes perfect sense to me, Tommy. I years ago, when I was a new Christian, I went to this Urbana meeting about missions that
Yeah.
is in Champaign, Urbana, and that's really where I committed my life to world evangelism. Was there, and one of the speakers at that conference, I still remember this guy. He wrote Paul Little was his name. Wrote a book that InterVarsity published years ago.
Loved his
And one
stuff.
of the things that Paul Little said during that event is he said, God can't steer a parked car. And so I've always remembered that, because as believers, we have to be on the move for God, and then he can steer our car in whatever direction he wants to steer it. But we have to do that. We just can't park and wait for God to do something. We have to be on the move, and that's part of what I've done through the years. I've I'm tired. Admittedly, I'm tired of pitching my own stuff, but I still pitch it. I still get rejected. I have all kinds of people that say no to me. And what I've learned over and over about that process is I can't really predict what that other person is going to do. I can't know whether they'll accept it, whether they'll be willing to publish like with Morgan James or any of that kind of stuff. But the person that I can do something about is right here. It's me. And so I'm going to keep doing my stuff, because that's the only person that I can really count on here at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And that's an encouragement to me, because I have to admit, I have too often taken a passive attitude towards the work that I've done, and I've justified it with particular, sometimes Christianized language. And this is an encouragement to me that I've already kind of taken seriously on a couple of fronts, just in our conversations, that you know that's a cop out, really, when it comes to it. So I appreciate that a lot. Great stories, and I'm going to steal Paul Little's line, God can't steer a parked car. That is a great statement. So I'd love to, there's so much more I'm sure, you could share in terms of your story, but I'd love to just shift for a moment to kind of your particular area of expertise in all things written, both as a literary agent, an acquisitions editor, and an author. And perhaps you can distinguish briefly between a literary agent and an acquisitions, editor. But I'd love to, just for those who maybe somewhere in the back of their minds, they thought, oh, I'd love to write, I've had this idea about doing this, or maybe are even in a little bit more active place in that. I'd love to just hear some of your thoughts from those three different perspectives of, what do you experience as some of the most common sticking points that people run into along the way? And I think these sticking points probably pertain outside of the writing world to the kinds of sticking points we perhaps run into in any venture that involves some risk and sticking our neck out. So I'd love to just hear your thoughts about, what have you experienced either personally, or what have you seen in people who have come your way?
Oh, there's a lot of different things that are whirling around, Tommy, when you ask that kind of stuff. But
It's a big one.
I the other thing that happened to me is that I got the opportunity to become an acquisitions editor at that first publisher that published my stuff, at David C. Cook, actually. And so as an acquisitions editor, you work actually inside the publishing house is the difference. And so I've worked at David C. Cook. I worked at Howard Books, which is an imprint of Simon Schuster, and then now for the last 12 years, I've been with Morgan James Publishing, which is a New York-based publisher. And the difference is when you're an acquisitions editor, you're working on the inside of that company to try to get your colleagues enthused about the book so that they issue a book contract. And then as an acquisitions editor, I'm the person that sends that contract to the author or to the literary agent to negotiate that contract and finalize that in the process. Is the
So you're the
go-between
go-between
my process.
between the author or literary agent and the people within the firm.
That's right, within the
Yeah.
publishing house. Yeah.
Okay,
So
that's helpful.
I'm basically people have described acquisitions as basically a hunter and a gatherer. So I'm basically out there looking for the right author, the right books, all those kinds of things. I mean, even at Morgan James, I mean, we receive over 5,000 submissions a year and only do about 180 or 200 books. So we still do a lot of books, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of sorting process to go through all that and figure out which ones you do and which ones you don't do. And so that's part of what I do. And then a literary agent, I did that for a while, just a couple of years. I had my own literary agency. And what you're doing there is really making pitches on behalf of authors to publishing houses with a book proposal or an actual manuscript to get a contract. And I wasn't very successful, at being a literary agent. Otherwise, I'd still be doing that. But it was another interesting part of the business. But I guess the sticking points that happen is that what a lot of people don't realize is that we get a lot of stuff as editors, as literary agents. Lots of information come our way, and we've got a lot of experience. So I've looked at thousands of proposals and submissions over the years. Basically, in a short amount of time, I can look at something and see if it's well written, if it's worth reading and worth proceeding and worth continuing on. And that's what my colleagues can do as well. So the sticking point, I guess I would say, is don't put your best stuff, over on chapter 4 or chapter 5, because they may never get there, So make sure your stuff, whatever it is, starts with a bang, has a really good title on it. Some people just put working title on their stuff and they send it in. They don't really have a title. What I found, sure, the publisher is going to get to choose the title for the book, but if you've put a lot of work and thought into what that title will be and built that into the fiber of the book, it's likely going to be the title for the book if you've put that kind of effort and energy into it. A number of years ago, I worked with a guy, Joe Leninger. He traded for 10 years in the Eurodollar pit of the Chicago Mercantile. Made $1 million every year he was there, retired after 10 years. And crazy experience. Joe wrote this kind of catharsis out of his time there in the Eurodollar pit. Nobody even knew what a euro was back then, but they were trading it already on the Chicago Mercantile floor. And he sent his book out a couple of times, manuscript, got rejected, didn't know what to do. And I read the book. I thought it was really interesting stories, but it was missing something. And that's what happens with a lot of these submissions. They're actually missing something that's not there. And that's what happened here. I asked him, I said, well, Joe, did you learn anything for being there 10 years on the mercantile floor? He said, oh yeah, he did. And so he went away and he wrote, 16 lessons about life and success that he learned. That's what the chapter was missing. It didn't have any takeaway value for the reader. And that's what happens with a lot of these people's stuff. It has no real value for that reader. And we're all selfish. We read books just to figure out what we can get out of it at the end of the day. So those lessons that Joe brought back to me became the backbone of this book that we put together for Broadman and Holman called Lessons from the Pit. And it was like the best-selling book, business book from Broadman and Holman that particular year that it came out. And hopefully it's helped a lot of people out there. But it was a really great experience for me to see how you have to shape something like that, even on the front end, to get it in the right kind of format. So it really does work for the publisher out there.
Sure. And I can only imagine that, having seen thousands of proposals, written as many books, that you probably have developed this innate, seemingly intuitive sense of what something needs. And I'm sure probably many times are met with resistance on those because the author or potential author thinks they know better. But I'm sure that's quite a important part of the process.
It is. And sometimes authors will listen to you and sometimes they won't. And if they won't, then we just, at Morgan James, we just wish them all the best and hope that, if maybe they'll come back later with something else and want to talk to us. And we've had that kind of experience over and over with the years. If you treat somebody right and send them back out into the marketplace, if they don't succeed with that book, then maybe the next one that they write, they'll remember you and bring it back. And I've had people do that over and over too.
Yeah, that's great. Well, again, this is kind of another area that there probably, 15 of these. Maybe this is your next book, 15 sticking points for authors or something like that. But I think there are so many parallels to the kinds of sticking points, which has to do with people not taking advice, maybe thinking they know better, not working things, so many lessons for people wherever they are in things. I'd love to, because this is one of the things that fascinated me when we were first connecting, on some of this. You've written biographies on Billy Graham, Chuck Colson, Louis Palau, John Perkins, names that are familiar, maybe not, with so many people who are listening to this podcast. But they're some of the most influential and high integrity people within the Christian landscape of the last 100 years. And to be able to have the direct contact that you've had to be able to write their story and have conversations with them, I would just love to hear just a little bit about what you've learned from them or some experience with them, because that is a incredibly unique. As a golfer, it would be like my getting a chance to interview Jack Nicklaus and Tiger Woods, and
Sure.
what that would be. I'd love to just hear a little bit about what writing those kinds of biographies was like.
I've had amazing experiences with each of these people. I mean, Chuck Colson, for example, came out of the whole Watergate experience, and worked for President Nixon and all those kinds of things. Um, I was writing a youth book about Chuck, and it turned out every single person that I interviewed wanted to tell me some funny story about Colson, because a lot of people didn't realize this about Colson, but even from when he was a little kid, he was a serious practical joker. I mean, he was the kind of guy that liked flies and ice cubes and, plastic dog do and all that kind of stuff. And so one of his writer, Ellen Bond, actually told me coming into her office once, and she found a severed arm on her desk, and looked like somebody left a severed arm there, and she screamed, and Colson was just standing around the door, watching, wait till that happened, because he's the guy that set that up, and so I included a lot of those funny stories like that in this youth book that I wrote about Chuck. Chuck was worried that I had too much humor that was in the book, but that's the kind of stuff that kids like, and so included that kind of information. So I've seen a different side sometimes of these people's personality than what we typically think about them. Another one that I can think of that you didn't mention is another Chuck. I'm thinking of Chuck Swindoll, Charles Swindoll. I'm one of the few journalists in the country that's interviewed Chuck, and I had lunch with him. Amazing, amazing guy, and he told me something that I usually remember when I go meet anybody, whether they're important or not. Chuck told me, he said, Terry, he said, there are no heroes in the body of Christ. He said, we're all like a bunch of guys in the back of a pickup truck trying to get our stuff together. And so, I try to think of that no matter who I meet at different points, because we're all just people at the end of the day. We all have our own issues, problems, challenges, things that we're up against. And we may or may not tell them to that other person that you're sitting across from, but we certainly have those things. And so each of us have to figure out in life how we maneuver through those things and go through them. I mean, Luis Palau, for example, I've written a couple books about Luis, and I sat in his kitchen, and heard him tell me his stories about his coming to faith. He's led huge crusades, meetings all around the world, shared the gospel with royalty in different places of the world, all kinds of incredible things that somebody like Luis Palau has done. And it was just a great honor and privilege on my part to be able to have that kind of interaction with these people.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, for those who don't know Luis Palau, I mean, he's like the Billy Graham of South America, right?
Oh yeah, and his crusades and his work were all over the place. Not just Latin America, but he
Right.
was from Argentina originally, and then but he's done things in Europe and Asia and all kinds of things through the years.
Yeah, what an incredible privilege, and I'm sure you feel, and I feel the same way, just in my little opportunities along the way. I'm so excited to have the opportunity to make a difference, hopefully, in some of the things I do. But even beyond that, it feels like it's such a privilege. It's such a privilege to be able to share in people's lives or experience some of the things that you're describing. And I think that's just one of the really exciting things about living our lives as an adventure with God. And of course, that often requires, stepping out in faith. So I always think about the story in the Bible of Peter walking on the water. And when I think about that story, I think about the fact that Peter asked to get out of the boat and walk on the water to Jesus, which he did. And then he started to sink, and Jesus, picked him up, brought him back into the boat. But none of the other of the 12 disciples asked to walk on the water.
That's
So
right.
only one of the 12 disciples carried with them for the rest of their lives this unbelievable experience of walking on the water with Jesus. And I think, gosh, I'd want to be that person that would want to step out in the boat. And not that I have that kind of faith, but I don't want to be the person that's just staying behind and watching someone else, with these opportunities. So I think that's just the exciting thing about life and about a life of faith. So
No, you're exactly right. It is. And so there are a lot of risk along the way, admittedly, but
yes,
no risk, no reward, is what I look at. So we have to try it. And
sure.
if there's another saying that I've heard over and over, is that if you don't try, it won't fly. So you have to try it.
Well, and the reality is, in that trying, there can easily be, uh, you know, 20 failures along the way, and certainly the world of an author with, the implicit rejections that they get along the way. Part of that is being willing to um, receive those times that it doesn't work out, that you step out of the boat and you just flat out sink. So yeah, that's so great. Well, um, we've kind of just gotten a taste of the things that you experienced over the years, and I so appreciate it. And I look forward to and hope to be able to create an ongoing kind of connection with you. A lot for me to learn from you, and so I will probably be picking your brain a lot more. But I'd love for those who are listening to the episode who would either like to connect with you to just say thanks, or perhaps have a question or something. How can people connect with you, and how might you connect with them with some of the work that you're doing?
Well, I'm real active on X or Twitter. I have about 180,000 followers over there. My email is actually in my profile right there on X. Terry at terrywhalin.com. People say that I'm one of the more accessible people that are in publishing, and I read my email, answer my email, all that kind of thing. So I want people to reach out to me and to be able to get a hold of me. You'll see on X the link to my blog. You can get my blog entries once a week. I do that. Get on my newsletter, all that kind of thing. The special offer that I have, Tommy, relates to that book you mentioned, the 10 Publishing Myths. Um, if people go to publishingoffer.com, that'll take you to a website where you can get this book for like $10, along with over $200 of bonus items that you can get. You can get the real book from me. That includes the shipping and everything. And so I want people to get this book, because it does basically tell people a lot of the basics about publishing, and practical things that they can do themselves to really succeed with their book. As I was putting this book together, one of the endorsers came back to me and she said, "Terry, you're missing the 11th myth." I'm like, "Okay, I'm game. What's the 11th myth?" And she told me the 11th myth should be that if I send my book to Oprah, she'll book me on her show. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's a pretty big myth. And so what I decided to do is I wrote that chapter. And when we designed the book, I designed that chapter to look exactly like the rest of the chapter. And so people can get that 11th myth from me for free. All you have to do is put your email in, but you can get it at terrylinks.com /11th 11th myth. And that'll take you to a little website where you put your first name and email address in. Then you can get that chapter for free.
Great. We'll put all of that in the show notes for people who didn't have a pen while they were listening to this. I will say that for me, the things that you have within these 10 publishing myths, and it's not a particularly long book, while they may be basic to you, even as someone who has written a book and has been immersed in this, many of the things within it were far from basic, and they are highly practical. So anybody who is interested in dipping their toe into the world of writing, it's a great and very helpful read. So,
well, thank you, Tammy. What I realized as I was writing this book is a lot of the publishing process is totally outside of anything that we can control as an author. And so
right.
what I tried to do in this book was give people 10 actual actions that they can control, whether they self-publish or whether they publish with a traditional publisher, some things that they can actually do to make a difference out there. And so that's part of the way I put that book together.
Yeah, which I loved when I read it, because it wasn't actually just telling the myths, it was telling the corresponding action to offset what the myth was. So I found that very helpful. So lots for people to take away from this. And I'm sure many people like myself would love to pick your brain a lot more deeply about what was it like to sit down with Chuck Colson or Louis Palau or Chuck Swindoll. I have about 4 or 5 of his books on my shelf. I think he's a phenomenal author. Fun conversation. I really enjoyed it, and a lot of very good practical things to take away. Thanks, Terry, for being a part of Space for Life, and just for all the good work you do on behalf of so many aspiring authors. So thanks so much for being on Space for Life.
Thank you, Tommy. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Well, we'll be back next week with another episode. You may not be an author yourself if you're listening to this, but you may know someone for whom this would be particularly helpful. So please share this. Let people know about the podcast in general. We have this I have this, unique privilege of being able to share people's stories and some of the lessons that I've learned over the years. So thanks for listening for Space for Life, and we'll be back next week.